She has broken the damn internet. And I'm telling you right now,
I come from a space of inclusion, and the narrative that I think that is problematic.
Cheryl Reeve just said something at the podium that has completely blown up the Sophie Cunningham story. Not a leaked text, not a locker room rumor, a live answer on camera that fans are still arguing about right now. While Jay Hill is tweeting, while Brandy Cross is going viral, while the Fever fan base is lining up on both sides of this thing, the Lynx head coach sat in front of reporters and gave the one answer nobody expected. And depending on who you ask, it either calmed this whole situation down or poured gasoline on it. Here's exactly what she said. Let's rewind for a second, because this story did not start with Cheryl Reeve. It started with Sophie Cunningham. The Fever guard made comments about men participating in women's sports, comments that were about the broader debate, not specifically about the WNBA. But once those comments hit social media, the internet did what the internet does. It stripped the context and turned it into a WNBA storyline, whether that was accurate or not. From there, it snowballed fast. A well-known Olympic cyclist posted a photo standing with a former union president and a state Democratic board member, all wearing shirts showing support for Sophie. That photo alone picked up massive attention, with plenty of people reading it as a direct show of solidarity with Cunningham's stance. Then Brandy Cross jumped in, publicly pushing back on the framing, arguing this was never a WNBA issue in the first place, but a fight over protections for young girls in sports more broadly. And then came Jay Hill, who has been one of the most consistent voices on anything involving the Indiana Fever this season. Her point was blunt. In 30 years of WNBA history, there has never been a transgender woman in the league, and to her, that fact gets buried every time this conversation flares up. She said it directly. Not whatsoever has this had anything to do with the WNBA on the roster level, and she wanted that on the record. So by the time reporters got in front of Cheryl Reeve, the temperature was already high. This wasn't a routine locker room question. Reeve was being asked, on the record, about protests happening outside WNBA arenas, about whether her own team's fans felt safe, and about where she personally stood on all of it. That is not a question most head coaches want during a playoff push. But Reeve didn't dodge it. She didn't give the safe, generic non-answer that coaches usually reach for in moments like this. She leaned into it, and that's exactly what has fans talking right now.
To go off on none other than Sophie Cunningham. Shout out to Amy East. And she stated, love this shot of the three of us, three-time Olympic cyclist, Igna Thompson, and that's her X account, It Thompson, former WDI USA president and DIA GD Democrats board member Carrie Dansky with me at a rally. This is how women show up for our girls. And as you guys can see, they wearing them anti-trans shirts with basically saying that they standing with Sophie. And to be honest with you guys, this thing is really making headlines across our country, man.
Hold on. Before you decide what side you're on, you need to hear the actual words Reeve used, because they are not what half the headlines are claiming. Here's what Cheryl Reeve actually said when a reporter asked her directly about the demonstrations happening outside Lynx games and whether fans felt their safe space was under threat. She said she does not believe fans should feel that way, and that safeguarding that environment is something she personally values about the league. She was clear that she hadn't seen every demonstration and couldn't speak to all of it, but she was firm that peaceful assembly is a right, whether you agree with the message or not. Then she turned to the league office itself. Reeve said the commissioner and league leadership have a responsibility to make sure that anything perceived as unsafe or discriminatory toward players gets addressed, and she said she trusts that leadership has eyes and ears on exactly that. That part alone is significant because it puts real accountability on the WNBA front office, not just on players or fans to sort this out themselves. But the moment that has really taken over group chats and comment sections came next. Reeve said in her own words that she comes from a space of inclusion. She didn't stop there. She specifically pushed back on the idea that transgender athletes are, in her words, the biggest problem in women's sports, calling that narrative problematic. She said there is a faction in the country turning this into a massive issue and that the real conversation should start with protecting trans kids, calling it a basic human rights issue when it comes to access to sports. Now, here's where she got more nuanced, and this is the part a lot of headlines are leaving out completely. Reeve drew a clear line between younger kids and post-puberty elite competition. She said once you're talking about Olympic-level sport or state scholarships, that's where she believes common-sense people need to sit down and find common ground, rather than a flat yes or no answer. She specifically rejected the idea that this comes down to, in her words, biological men in girls' locker rooms, calling that phrasing an innuendo that paints transgender women as predators, which she said simply is not what's actually happening on the ground. So when you put it all together, Reeve wasn't picking a side in the Sophie Cunningham story directly. She was doing something coaches almost never do in this climate. She gave a full, detailed, personal answer instead of a two-sentence dodge, and that is exactly why this clip is spreading right now.
Well, I don't think we should feel like our safe space is being threatened. That's what I enjoy about the WNBA, and I think we have to continue to safeguard that. I don't think these demonstrators are not being peaceful, or not that I've seen, and I haven't seen all of it. I haven't heard everything that's happening, but everyone has a right to peacefully assemble, right? That's whether you agree with them or not, it doesn't matter. It happens every day, on the corner and discussions, and it's not about agreeing. I think, you can have an opinion, in this space. I think the commissioner and the league have a responsibility to ensure that any topic that could be problematic for players, what they perceive to be unsafe or threatened in any way or discriminated against. I think that's something that's fair for our leadership, and I'm quite sure.
So was that a brave answer or a mistake for a coach to make in the middle of a playoff race? Stick with me because it gets more complicated. Here's the thing about Reeve's answer that's splitting fans right down the middle. Supporters of what she said are calling it one of the most honest, unscripted moments from a WNBA coach in years. She wasn't handed talking points. She wasn't told what to say by a PR team. She sat there and gave a real answer about a real cultural fight happening at her own arena, and she did it knowing exactly how loud the reaction would be. But critics are reading it completely differently. To them, Reeve effectively sided against Sophie Cunningham's original comments without ever saying her name, and did it while young fans were literally sitting in the stands with signs. Some are asking why a head coach is weighing in on a national political debate at all instead of sticking to basketball. Others are pointing out that Reeve herself acknowledged she hadn't seen every demonstration, so how can she fully speak to whether they were peaceful or not? And then there's the layer almost nobody is talking about. Reeve didn't just talk about transgender inclusion. She pivoted the conversation toward a broader point about women's sports overall, saying cisgender men have held women back for years when it comes to access to facilities, uniforms, and locker rooms. She specifically asked whether the young girls sitting at games holding anti-trans signs actually understand the real ways they're being marginalized, and pointed out the country still doesn't have the Equal Rights Amendment ratified in all 50 states. That's a much bigger swing than a simple statement about Sophie Cunningham. Reeve essentially told the room that she thinks the entire framing of this controversy, the one Cunningham sparked, the one the Olympic cyclist amplified, the one Jay Hill and Brandy Cross have been fighting over online, might be pointed at the wrong target completely. And she said all of that in a press conference that was supposed to be about tomorrow's matchup with two of the highest scoring teams in the league. It's worth pointing out how unusual that is. Most coaches, when a reporter tries to steer a basketball presser into a hot-button national topic, will give a version of "that's above my pay grade" and move the conversation back to the game plan. Reeve did the opposite. She stayed on the topic for several full minutes, answered follow-up context nobody forced her to answer, and connected it back to her own experience talking with transgender families. Whatever you think of the position she landed on, she clearly walked in ready to actually engage engage with the question instead of deflecting it. Think about the position that puts her in. She has to walk into an arena tomorrow, coach against Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell, and do it with this clip circulating everywhere, with Fever fans reading every word she said, and with her own fan base deciding whether they agree with their coach or not. That's not a comfortable spot for anybody, especially not in the middle of a playoff push, where every single possession matters.
That number one, that transgender athletes are the biggest problem in women's sports. And I think this is what's bothersome, is that there's a faction of people in our country that are making this a massive issue. We have some issues. Number one, we need to protect trans kids. Every kid, to me, it's a human rights issue. Every kid has a right to sports, regardless of gender diverse, transgender. Every kid has the right to access. Now, what gets nuanced is, when you're beyond puberty, when you're an Olympic sport, when you have scholarships at stake and that sort of thing. That's where I say that common sense people get together and you find common ground to find a way to be inclusive.
Here's the reality check nobody wants to say out loud. Reeve never mentioned Sophie Cunningham's name once. Every bit of this fallout is coming from how fans and media connected the dots themselves. So where does this actually leave things? Reeve made a point of saying this is not a simple yes or no issue for her, and that's honestly the most important line in the entire answer. She talked about listening to transgender families directly, about educating herself on the hormone therapy and science side of the conversation, and about wanting the WNBA to be proactive leaders on this, instead of reacting after the fact. She even said she's been raising this internally with league leadership for years, asking what the plan is if and when this becomes a bigger issue at the WNBA level specifically, since right now there has never been a transgender player in the league's history. That last part lines up exactly with what Jameel Hill was saying online. 30 years, 0 transgender players, and yet the national debate keeps circling the WNBA anyway. In a weird way, Reeve and Jameel Hill are actually making a similar point from two completely different angles. Jameel Hill is frustrated the conversation keeps attaching itself to a league where it isn't currently happening on the roster. Reeve is trying to get ahead of a conversation she thinks is coming eventually, whether the league is ready or not. Meanwhile, Sophie Cunningham hasn't said a word publicly since this all exploded. No statement, no follow-up post, nothing addressing Reeve's comments directly. That silence is its own story right now because it's leaving a vacuum that everybody else, the cyclists, the pundits, the coach, is filling in for her. Whether Cunningham responds at all, and what she says if she does, could completely change where this story goes next. And then there's tomorrow's actual basketball game sitting underneath all of this. Reeve still has to prepare her team for one of the toughest offensive matchups on the schedule, a Fever team playing with real pace, real spacing, and real shot making around Aaliyah Boston in the paint. She talked openly about trusting her team's identity, about not being afraid to let their three-point volume run high some nights, and about the confidence she has defensively, even against a team scoring at this level. That's the part of her job that doesn't pause just because a press conference clip went viral. So you have a coach who gave one of the most honest answers of the season on a subject bigger than basketball, sitting right next to a coach who has to somehow keep her locker room focused on X's and O's starting tomorrow. Both of those things are true at the same time, and that tension is exactly why this story isn't slowing down.
Into transgender families, and what I know is exclusion is not the answer. We've got to find the common ground and be inclusive. That's the space, I think, if we all come from that. I also think like I said, the issue isn't as big as the issues that we have in women's sports. Whether it's cisgender men that have held us down for years in spaces like being able to have access to facilities and uniforms and locker rooms, all the things that these young girls that are sitting at games with anti-trans.
Now, think about this for a second before you scroll to the comments. If your own coach gave this answer about your team, would you want her to keep talking, or would you want her to stay out of it completely? Let's lay out exactly where this stands right now. Sophie Cunningham made comments about men in women's sports that were never specifically about the WNBA. The internet turned it into a WNBA story anyway. And Olympic cyclists posted a photo standing in support of Cunningham that went massively viral. Brandy Cross pushed back on the framing. Jay Hill pointed out the WNBA has never actually had a transgender player in 30 years of existence. And then Cheryl Reeve, unprompted by any of those names directly, gave a detailed personal answer about inclusion, protecting kids, and the need for common ground on elite-level competition, while also redirecting part of the conversation toward long-standing issues women in sports have faced from men specifically. Reeve never said Cunningham's name. She never attacked anyone directly, but because of the timing, right in the middle of this exact controversy, her words are being read by both sides as a statement on the entire situation. Supporters are calling it a courageous honesty from a coach who didn't have to say anything at all. Critics are calling it a coach overstepping into a fight that isn't hers to referee. And Sophie Cunningham, so far, has said nothing back. That silence might be the loudest part of this whole story right now. So here's where we leave it. You've got Sophie Cunningham's original comments, the viral photo that turned this into a national talking point, Jay Hill and Brandy Cross fighting it out publicly, and now Cheryl Reeve stepping in with one of the most detailed answers a WNBA coach has given all season, all without naming a single name. Whether you think she handled that the right way or completely overstepped, this is not a story that's cooling down anytime soon, especially with Reeve's Lynx and Cunningham's Fever both still fighting for playoff positioning. So here's the real question. Do you think Cheryl Reeve's answer was a brave, necessary moment for the league? Or do you think a head coach should have stayed completely out of it? Drop your answer below, smash like, and subscribe.